Hello and welcome once again to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. I'm Keith David Henry, and you're on the Community Listening Network. If you've been following the program, you know that we're currently on the topic of the Divine Feminine, which means to me, among other things, that we will be discussing things that more or less have been suppressed over the last several thousand years, particularly with the advent of monotheism, and as we spoke about the Sumerian ideal of culture, which just says outright that the feminine is inferior, and in its manifesto, which was part of the culture, it basically said that the woman was the property of the man and had no rights. And this is, completely the opposite of how the feminine or the divine feminine has been regarded throughout history. As a matter of fact, there's plenty of evidence that the divine feminine is really the basis of modern culture and civilization. And, I've asked myself, why have these divine elements or traces of the divine feminine or the feminine as manifested in womanhood or any type of physical connectivity with God, why has that been suppressed? And, of course, one of the programs I did where we talked about how religion has suppressed a lot of these things, I go into detail about some of the esoteric sciences. So I think it's extremely appropriate that we're talking once again with Jill Mattson, who's agreed to join us for another week. And we're talking about music and sound and vibration. And in the last program, we talked just a little bit about the history of music in civilization, or sound throughout the ages. And we're going to welcome once again Jill Mattson to the program. Hello, Jill. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Jill, before we get into the history of music in civilization, why don't you tell us a little bit about your websites, your books, and your music, and what you do with them and where we can get them?
Okay. On my website, which is www.jillswingsoflight, and as I said last week, imagine that, Wings of Light was already taken, so it's jillswingsoflight.com. I have my cyber art gallery that's very spiritually inspired, and I have books and my music. And I also have some YouTube clippings with some of this information at my YouTube URL is Wings of Light. And I have a free sound healing newsletter, which is, I think, really cool. Of course, I love this stuff.
Well, like anything free. So.
Yeah, and it also has free sound healing, free MP3 sound healing, my sound healing music. I have one from the Stardust CD, and a free MP from the Paint Your Soul, working on your soul evolution. And then I have a selection from some new CDs I have coming out, the Bach flower essences in music. And I have the actual frequencies of the flower as well as the music of the flower for very powerful emotional healing. And that's at www.jillshealingmusic.com. So that's jillshealingmusic.com.
Now, you have a book out, and you have another book that will be out soon. Why don't you tell us about those?
Okay. The first one, Transformative Power and Sound. If you order that on my website, I've just recently had that book done. I've added a couple more chapters. So anybody who orders it on the website, I'll send them the new one with the greater information or more information. But anyway, that one, I've gone throughout antiquity, and I've noted processes to use sound to improve your energy, to change your health, to improve your, dial up any brainwave you want, which in turn affects chemicals in your body. and many other things for spirituality purposes, etc. And I have all kinds of interviews with people today that are using very simple and easy products that are inexpensive and or free exercises to use sound for all these powerful tools to enhance your life in any possible way. In my imagination, sounds like a magic wand, but you just have to know how to use it. And that's what that book is about.
And what is that title again of that book?
On the website, it's Transformative Power in Music, and shortly I will update the website, and it'll be Ancient Sounds, Modern Healing. I changed the title of the book when I lengthened it.
Great. And the new book will be out when?
I'm saying it's completed now. I'm just doing some final editing. Maybe give it 5 months or so.
Okay.
And my CDs, I have a Stardust CD that has the ancient Chinese method of balancing your spirit, balancing for astrological low electromagnetic energy to make it easier to deal with challenges. And I also found some physicists who had a method for converting the atomic periodic chart of element to frequency.
Wow.
So I added in carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen frequencies, thinking, oh boy, this is my theory. You know, that's the same kind of stardust. It's what's in our body. It's what's in the stars. And so since our body is composed largely of those elements, I was thinking it to be a tuning. Then I have another CD, Paint Your Soul, in which I'm using the healing on the soul level of our being. And I have the Fibonacci series of numbers, which God had to use when he created things. It's in everything. It's in the sky, in a seashell, in our body, in the beehive, in the sunflower, a cornstalk. But these patterns, they're all numbers, so they convert to music. So I have not only them in tones, which cannot be found on our piano because the proper math would be in between our piano keys, small differentiations of tones. And I also used them in my chordal structure so that the music, if you were to graph it, would spiral up to God, is the idea. And I also had the solfeggio scale in that. That was a scale that I read about in a book that found a frequency code in the Old Testament. And it was in Numbers chapter 11. It was Leonard Horowitz's book. Anyway, the frequency code was used apparently in the Old Testament where it was encoded. But it was also used throughout the Middle Ages. And from what I've read, and again, I can't verify, but I've read it, that the church, again, controlled the music because they're controlling pretty much everything throughout the Middle Ages. And it was their scale. It wasn't one that the populace could use. Again, you know, so if you want healing, you come to church.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful scale. In fact, there's a whole healing clinic on it in Ohio by David Holtz at Soma Energetics. And they have trained thousands of practitioners to just use these 6 tones for wonderful things. Like one of the tones is your DNA. But people report great things from these tones, and they can even do I have in my book a photo of an aura Carillion photography of just a person before and after they listen to the tones, and you can see the aura just light up with these little gems.
Wow.
So that's in my Paint Your Soul CD. And shortly I will have the Bach Healing Flower Symphonies on my website.
Sounds very interesting. You know, Jill, so nice to meet another geek. It's, I'll tell you because I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but I'm just fascinated by, you know, the integration of, you know, actual science and intuitiveness into the mix. And I'm convinced that when Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge, that he was talking about something esoteric and underlying that the human species as a whole has forgotten, a natural gift of connecting with consciousness and connecting with universal knowledge that has been replaced by television pretty much and by education and, you know, by the things that are being done to our bodies, the things that are being done to our minds to make us forget who we are, which we are children of the universe. We're children of God. The myth that many religions, particularly monotheistic religions, push is that we have to do something to become a child of God. That we somehow have to throw away something to become a child of God. And these are limiting influences that keep us from realizing our own internal power. I don't know if I mentioned to you, but I just written a book. Those that have listened to my program, and the book is called Terra, Terra, Return of the Divine Feminine. And in that book, there's a chapter on music and sound. And when I got to the music part, I was so overwhelmed with emotions and feelings that I couldn't put into words. That it was a bit frustrating. So it's very gratifying to be talking to you and to have you expound on those. And what I would ask, if you have time, is that everyone that buys my book, if you would just visit their house and lecture for a few hours, I would
Sure.
I would appreciate it. That might stretch your schedule a little thin, but you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. So I just want to remind everyone that you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. This is Keith David Henry. We're on the Community Listening Network. And we're speaking with Jill Mattson, who is an accomplished artist, musician, lecturer, and author, and also a geek from everything I can determine. But it's kind of funny, when I was coming up, it was always so unpopular to be a geek, and these days it's just all the rage, so to speak.
And then I'm in Lakeland too.
Yeah, to be the geek, and I'm loving it. Last week's program, we started talking a little bit about the history of music in civilization, and I hate being locked into a program of talking about things. So anything you want to bring up, if you want to break in whatever, please do, because I think the intuitive approach to anything is so important. But I would like to get in some depth into the history of music and civilization, and why should we even be thinking about that? Why do we care about the history of music and civilization?
Well, as you will see, I believe that the history of music is actually the formative vibrations that our mental, emotional, and conscious experiences are created from. So with this knowledge, you can have more control over your experiences and your life. And my thought is that since, as I go through this, I will show you what I've read and show you how the tones change as man involves into matter and becomes further away from God. And so with music, we can then recreate the harmonics and take ourselves back closer to God.
Now, if you don't mind, I hate to interrupt you, but if you don't mind, can you characterize in a way that people can understand it, the idea of being further away from God or getting closer to God? Because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I understand what you're saying, but if you could expound upon that.
Well, in the esoteric reading, they talk about involving into matter, meaning becoming away from a perception that we're one with God, that we're separate from God. It's more a system of duality where there's black and white, like a magnet has a south and a north pole. We're simply experiencing what it's like to feel separate from God. And so when I read ancient writings, it seems like man is evolving from matter, and he's having these experiences, getting further and further away from God for the experience of duality. Just it's like if you were love all the time, you couldn't experience forgiveness because there would be nothing to forgive. If you didn't have duality, you wouldn't need kindness. You wouldn't need forgiveness. You wouldn't need mercy if everything was always love. So that I believe that the process of involving is for the experience, and then we can be all these beautiful virtues and experience them, such as forgiveness. And then as we go back towards oneness with God, then love becomes everything. In the Buddhist religion, they talk about, you get to a point above God where everything just is and everything is okay. And it's kind of like in antiquity has that theme throughout it.
I appreciate that, Jill. For those that have listened to the program, I actually did a 3-part series called The Fallacy of Separation. And the last program in that series is actually airing the week that we're recording this program. And I find it so, again, reaffirming that the things that have been given to me through an intuitive, an internal approach to connection with God rather than necessarily an external, religion or learning or education-based approach, which I have nothing against that, but the internal is where the power is. The imagination is where that connectivity to God is. And essentially, you pretty much said in a few sentences what I stressed over 3 programs. So, I'm going to ask you not to do that.
Okay.
Of course, I'm joking, but I just find it very reaffirming and very interesting, and it's the whole thrust of my approach to esoteric, which is the internal imagination and intuitive approach that is so important to this process. So if you would then, why don't we start talking? One of the things I started to mention, the terminology I used in that series was the subjectivity experiment, where Source, the one that you mentioned, where everything is all right, where there is no duality, decided to experience subjectivity, which is a sense of separation. And that separateness, and I'm sure this will play right into our discussion of history of music and civilization, where that separateness has been perverted, that subjectivity has been perverted by a small group of people and represented as an actual separation, which really doesn't exist. The sense of separation is strictly for the experience. It is not an actuality. So I don't know if that will fit into your discussion of the history of music and civilization, but if you would, pick up with that, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Well, let me start. I'm going to go back to my, again, esoteric readings and also readings of Rudolf Steiner. But when I go way back, I just find a few little bits of pieces of things that I've read. And it talks about, I've found with the Lemurian music, and that their smallest tone that they listen to would be 9 of our tones apart. So in our hearing range, we could only hear 3 or 4 tones. So I'm assuming that they had and were using some type of clairaudience or tones within their heads, so they were hearing within their heads. They were hearing a much larger range of the electromagnetic spectrum. And the tones, from what I could read, they were just like wind chimes, no beginning or end, and were mostly descending. The next thing I found in antiquity was with the Atlantean Society. And I found nothing on the interval of the 8s, but I found that the Atlantean Society had a music system tuned to successive 7th intervals. So like what we would consider a distance of 7 notes, they would consider a distance of 1 note. In this readings that I'd read that the Lemurian music united man with the divine, and that the Atlantean music united man with his divine self, or his higher self, or his God self.
Now, if I could just stop you for a moment, something came into my head, and I don't know if it's germane or not, but please don't waste any time if it's on this, if it's not. But when I think about the music scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, when I think about that scale, how would you relate that scale, the Sound of Music? I'm sure a lot of people have heard that music. How would that movie, how would you relate that scale to the concepts that you just mentioned of the numbers of notes?
Well, It's like if you could imagine a piano that was maybe 15 feet long, and the keys were really huge. And in between the sound of going from the smallest note on our piano, it went from bum, bum. That would be the smallest interval. There's nothing closer.
Okay.
And so now imagine like a cosmic keyboard that has a lot of tones, most of which are above and below our hearing range, because they're not that close together.
Okay.
And again, there's not a lot written on this. This is kind of sketchy. But there is more when you go back into the ancient Persian and Indian epics, like 4 to 8 millennium BC, or the Mesolithic or the Neolithic areas. Again, in the writings of the original Zoroaster and in Persian cosmosophy, they talk about the musical system being based on the interval of a sixth. And they talk about music relating with a spiritual experience.
Okay. Now, the other thing that comes to mind is I know, I've gone to the ear doctor and I had a sound test, and they play octaves, and I guess they're trying to decide how many octaves you can hear and whether or not you are within a normal range. So is that the sort of thing that you're talking about?
Yes, but as the notes are real far apart, we wouldn't be able to hear that many notes unless we start using a clairaudience.
Okay.
So the idea here is that as man is evolving in matter, as he has experienced more duality, as he's appearing more separate from God, what he's listening to, the tones get closer and closer together.
Ah, okay.
Okay? So now when you look, and we actually get multiple journal entries here. When you look at Egypt and the Far East China, about, 5,000 years before Christ, their musical system was called the Lu, and it was based on a system of notes that are 5 of our notes apart. They assigned their notes to each constellation into the stars. So like there would be a note for Capricorn or Aquarius or so forth. And they were balancing the electromagnetic, low levels of electromagnetic energy that are produced when a planet moves throughout the solar system producing waves. When they come in, those waves are low level, and I believe, and Dr. Becker, who's written several books on this, and who's a scientist, believes that these low-level electromagnetic energies are transported in our paraneural tissue system and would influence our organs, our bodies, our health, our emotions. Astrology. Throughout antiquity, people are into astrology, age after age after age, and they're balancing these low-level energies. And music was done to do that.
Okay, so I think I'm seeing this now, and I hate to keep interrupting you, but I'm trying to picture this in my mind, and hopefully the audience will get something out of this as well. So when we're talking about the number of notes, and you probably said this and I just missed it, but you're actually talking about the number of notes between octaves.
Well, I wouldn't say between octaves, because an octave is mathematically, you're doubling the frequency.
Okay.
But just imagine, like your piano keyboard, bum, bum, is the difference that we have in tonality in a whole note.
Mm.
But they would have bum, bum, would be their smallest interval.
I understand. Okay. Now I get it.
Imagine giants with giant sounds.
All right. Okay.
Alrighty, so in this in this Egyptian period, they're using music to balance the astrological energy. It's musical astrology. And they also write that they're using music to control the populations, and that the government controls music. No microwaves, no cell phones, no satellites. And in the writings, they talk about, this village they're going to be good, they're going to be easy to govern because their music is so sweet, or their music is so perfect. They also controlled what instruments you were allowed to use at what time during the year, because they were honoring the process of harmonics. And somehow they understood that harmonics has an impact on our body, and it does, because we have these tonal matrix in our body And as harmonics are created from tones, they affect different body processes. So with harmonics, they're like a little, like if you drop a pedal into a pond and you see all the little ripples, maybe you could imagine those as harmonics. They're like afterwaves. And they're formed by there's a mathematical formula that you can create the pitch of them. With different instruments, like a C in a trumpet is going to have a different sound, even though it's the same frequency as a C on a violin. And that would because in the different instruments, different harmonics or different after vibrations are louder or softer. So, and they would see that a little different. They would see that in terms of the elements, because they were doing feng shui and balancing the spirit of individuals. So they would say that an instrument made out of wood, and maybe liken that to the earth element, is going to have a different balancing effect than an instrument made out of metal. As you can see, so by using the elements of what constructed the instrument, they also controlled the harmonics, and they're tuning up their population's health emotionally, mentally, and physically. They also, because they believed that music was the key to control the populations, and that each vibration would vibrate up to God. So think of each tone of music as like a telephone line to God. And they would create orchestras, I just love this, of like 10,000 piece orchestras or bands. I mean, I live in a town where there's only 6,000 people.
Right.
Yeah. So
give them all an instrument.
Yeah, because that would be a more powerful reaching out to God.
Huh.
Recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, I visited a little Latvian country, Estonia, and I met this lady who told me about this country's history. Her grandparents had been slaves, and the country of Latvia, they've been owned by Russia, they've been owned by Germany, they've been owned by Scandinavia, and they've always been slaves. And she talked about the 2 times in their history when they were free, when they got free from Russia and free after World War II, that it was preceded by a song fest, a little country of 1 million people, that every 5 years they have a song fest in which they bring 500,000 people. Half of their country shows up in one spot and sings all day and night for 7 days. And she said that it was that they were always so broken by being occupied with cruel, the Russians and the Germans weren't very kind, and that they were able to rebirth their spirits and their power by singing, by music. So that there's a recent example of using the same kind of power within a lot of sounds. Okay, so they're on to the 5th. And then the next time in history, you see, is the Greek period. And I would say at this point in time, the soul's beginning to see the world exclusively throughout his physical body, and the spiritual world's beginning to fade as he incarnates more into matter. They had a system of music that baffled me for years because they kept talking about tetrachords. And to me, I'm a musician, so I know a chord is the first note, the third note, and the 5th note of the scale, because that's what we find harmonious. But throughout antiquity, what we find harmonious was not harmonious back then, because they were having a different experience. And so the tetrachord is really 2 intervals of a 4th, and then they have 4 notes within that tetrachord, and they would vary based on the mood they produced. And they would name these scales like Iorian or Dorian after individuals and personalities. Like if somebody was kind of moody, they'd make up a scale that matched his mood. So we're incarnating more in matter. We're becoming very material, and our personalities are developing more as opposed to the spirit. And the chords now are still going down in a descending note, and they're still more like, from what I can read anyway, more like wind chimes. There's not like a beginning and after a tone. It's just a melodious sounds, ongoing sounds. When you get into the Middle Ages, as in previous ages, the music has been controlled by the higher-ups, if you will, and the Catholic Church is now controlling the music within the church and the liturgical texts. They start to have amens at the end of their songs. So now they're begging a beginning and an end, and it's like the birthing of the tonic or the first note of the scale. They took the modes from the Greek scale, for the Greek, modes, and they basically took them all off the market, except for two, which now have been renamed major and minor. But quite a few things start happening towards the latter part of the Middle Ages, and here's a really interesting point. In the beginning of the Middle Ages, they write about the interval of a third, which we would consider a staple of harmony, like bum, bum, bum. It just sounds nice together. So they say that a third was like scratching your fingers on a chalkboard.
Really?
Well, that's because they just came out of the civilization that was tuned to a fourth. So as we get into the Middle Ages, the third, the 1-3-5 system becomes prominent, particularly with the Renaissance and the classical music. I have read in the latter part of the British history in the turn of the century, like the Theosophists and some of the Rosicrucians, and I've read some books that are reportedly written by ascended masters and so forth, and they had really interesting comments on music. They report, or I read, that they considered that the classical music pulled societies out of the Dark Ages. It was the elaborate mathematical underpinnings of the chords and the harmonies. They have like mathematical patterns, like first note, third note, fourth note, fifth note, for example, and that might repeat over and over and over again in a classical symphony. And it's really tuning up a certain part of consciousness of your body and of your health and of your thinking and your emotions.
Interesting.
They talk about being very pleased with the raising of the civilization with the Renaissance music. And they also talk about how the early classical music came into being. In the early classical music, let's say Bach and Haydn, Mattson, they had very trilly, ornamental music with just fluffy, lots of fluffy, pretty little things, and that this would be the forerunner for the Victorian dress and decorative architecture. But the music comes in first. And in reading these materials, I read this little conversation where they were concerned about a lot of people having a very cold heart and hiding behind a very pretty dress and a very handsome house.
Yeah.
And so they talk about overlighting Beethoven. And I don't know, Beethoven is just so compassionate. I mean, his stuff to me just like, it just grounds me. I just feel so much pathos, so much compassion. They also write in the book that if you look into the history books in Europe, that there are no charities prior to Beethoven's music. That all that happened historically after his music was introduced. In other words, it's the same theme. It's like when the music is running, the society maintains, and when you get a new set of music, the society has a new experience. Throughout antiquity, like I read this in the King Arthur kind of legends and stuff like that, they talked about they would have choirs that would run 24/7, and they believed that this would maintain their control and their society. The ancient Chinese and the Indians did this too. They would have these 24/7 soundings and tonings to maintain the harmonic balance of their civilization. And again, I mean, I don't recall this, but I'm just reading. They talk about that when the music goes, then the music pattern goes, that so does the civilization. So anyway, you get into the Renaissance, and you have this chordal systems of threes, and then the melodies are clearly twos because they run up and down the scale, and now they're ascending and descending. Another very significant thing that happened in the Renaissance was the early Renaissance used scales that were based on math, somewhat based on Pythagorean math. And when you did that, the early pianos would have like very large sharps and flats, and they would have 3 and 4 flats, like it would be like a tiered birthday cake. You'd have a flat for the key of G, sharp for the key of G, you'd have a sharp for the key of E, you'd have a sharp for the key of F, and it wasn't the same because they were using different mathematical formulas to create these scales. And it was expensive. You would need different pianos and different instruments for different keys. But when the church, for the first time that at least I read in antiquity, loses control and classical musicians can now make a living by playing for an audience, popular music, you now introduce opera singers who say, hey, take it up. I can't go that high, or take it down. And in order to do that, to accommodate a singer's voice range, you have to change key. And that was very economically difficult. So what they did was they changed the entire way that you create a scale. And we came up with what we have today, which people think was around forever, and it certainly wasn't, is the equal temperament scale. If you were to graph the equal temperament scale, you would get like a circle, as opposed to the ancient spiral. But the beauty of the equal temperament scale is that you can go from key to key to key, and it solved the economic problem of not having to buy new instruments every time you accommodated a vocalist's singing range. Oh. But I've also read in the esoteric mystery schools commentaries about how the creation of the equal temperament scale kind of separated the eastern part of our Earth from the western part. The western part, we have the equal temperament scale, which has been classified in the esoteric schools as oral caffeine. They say that this type of listening pattern produces a very industrious population, people that are going to be material and, create things and develop in that regard. In the East, like look in India, they're using the old scales that were historically more consonant and that raised more towards the divine, according to antiquity. And you see that they don't develop, let's say 100 years ago, they were not developing their industrial part of their countries, but they were developing meditation and other spiritual processes. And today, now our pop music today is all over the world, so I believe that the music is that once again it's going to lessen the differences between the East and the Western hemispheres. We're going to become more alike because the music is getting more common. It's what's uniting us. It's what's creating maybe even peace in a regard. And so with this new type of scale and rap music, if we continue on in history here, is the singing of one note, one pitch over and over and over and over again. So if we go back in retrospect, we start with Lemurians with the notes at 9 intervals apart. You go to 7 with the Atlanteans, 6 with the Persians, 5 with the Chinese and the Egyptians, 4 with the Greeks, 3 with the Middle Ages, and 2 with the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and 1 to now. So that's my theory on how one way in which the different mathematical calculations behind what notes we hear will lay out the plan and the lessons for a civilization as we evolve and as we evolve. And just another thought, I was thinking about jazz music. When jazz music first hit the scene, again, it was considered music of the devil. It was scandalous. Now, when you analyze the music of jazz, it's the same Renaissance chord, which is based on the mathematical sequence of 1, 3, 5, and they add the 7th note of the scale. It's just a different sound. But when it was new, it was like probably I would imagine many older people had the same reaction to jazz as an older person today has to rap music. They go, ugh, you know? And so in a way, our young people coming in with new music and new styles of music, that will precede incredible quantum leaps in your society. And if you look at all the music changing from jazz to swing to the Beatles to rock and roll to all the different styles that we got going now, that would precede our changes in from introduction of the television to the common use of a cell phone. I mean, as this technology advances, I would suggest that these esoteric societies would suggest that the music changes first. And so my thought is, okay, now that at least I'm imagining this or thinking this or assuming this, what I've done with my own personal music is I'm saying that if this is how we evolved into matter on this wonderful experience, now to get back closer to God, to have better health, to have better thoughts, to have better emotions, to have better everything, we should be able to use music as a toolbox to take us back. And then that's what I've done in my CDs. The Paint Your Soul is taking you back to the level of the soul, and the Stardust is up to the spirit. And I got lots more music to make.
Fascinating. I got to tell you, I could listen to you for several hours, and hopefully at some point you'll come back on the program. I'm twisting your arm.
Okay.
But, by the way, you are listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. I'm Keith David Henry, your host, and we're speaking with Jill Mattson, accomplished artist, musician, lecturer, and author. And I'm thrilled by the information I'm getting. I'm hoping it's valuable to you as well. What I wanted to ask you is we've got probably 13 minutes left or so, and there are two things I want to hit. One, very briefly, because I consider myself a geek. I just love the sciences, and the more intricate, the better. And one of my very great passions is particle physics, and I'm just fascinated with quantum mechanics, particularly the more recent string theory. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've had time to think about that with regard to music. I mean, the implications are obvious for me, and probably for you as well. But if you could just expound just a moment on what you would say the implications of string theory are to our understanding of music and how sound affects the universe.
Well, first I would suggest that if you think of a string bass and think of a string, okay? Well, I would like to relate that, string theory is called string theory because a string vibrates. And think of an instrument such as a violin. The only thing that I would say with string theories is that it's like on an instrument you have a beginning and the end of a string, and you make the string shorter to come up in frequency. But in string theory, what they're suggesting is that by different segments of the string you can get all the vibrations. And I'm not sure of all the details, but I believe the proponents of string theory like it because somehow or other it works with the theory of gravity. And I would suggest that music and string theory have a lot in common.
No, I would tend to agree. One of the components of string theory that I really like is that essentially they're saying that everything is strings, and the only difference between a brick and air is the vibration at which the string is vibrating and the size of the string.
Right.
Which really speaks to what we're talking about, that, everything is vibrating, everything is moving. And I don't want to spend too much time on that. What I would really like to get into for a few minutes, we've got about 12 minutes left, is I would like you to give me your take on the idea of the distinction and or integration of the divine feminine and the divine masculine where it relates to music, sound, and vibration.
Okay. I don't know if I can do that in 12 minutes, but I can start.
Oh, come on.
Okay. First of all, in my reading of antiquity, for what it's worth, one thing that I did read, and again, just because I read it doesn't necessarily mean it's so, but I thought it was a fascinating idea, was that in some of the earlier societies, let's say the Atlantean and Lemurian, that they were more feminine dominated, which means just as we have like a paternal society today that's masculine dominated, I've read that those were feminine dominated, and that decisions made out on intuition and feelings were dominant. I also read, again in these very eclectic resources, that the women of those ages misused it and misused men as well. Throughout these readings, they also talk about the masculine ages, which we're coming out of, in which the masculine, well, you could look at the men, both the men and women have misused it, or you can even look beyond that and say there was an age when we were learning about the value of emotions, and then there was an age when we were developing our mental abilities, which would be, let's say, the last thousands and thousands of years. And that when they talk about the new age coming up, and when Jesus talks about preparing us for a new age, he's talking about time coming up shortly. And my understanding that one of the big things that's going to happen is that there'll be a rebirthing, a revival of the value of our feelings. Determination and will, for example. Those are feelings. Courage. It's a feel. It's not necessarily weak. By underplaying the feminine side, or shall we say the feelings, you've really made a mockery out of men, and you've made them very powerless and weak. Because when you try to pretend to be strong and not have feelings, of course, deep down it's the feelings that are going to control you, even if it's pushed to a subconscious level.
Yes.
And so that what's happening, I believe, in the coming years is that we're going to not just, well, we're going to first of all have to rebirth the strength and knowledge and power within our feelings, but then that we will be able to balance these with our thoughts, so that harmony is the purpose. In terms of music, when let me see, when you speak, like when I speak to you right now, I'm speaking an intellectual thought, which I would consider to be masculine. It's more of electric energy. It's higher up on the electromagnetic spectrum in my mind. I'm just being intuitive and imaginative. My thoughts go fast. They feel fast. My feelings feel much lower, and they feel much slower. But with the thoughts, I'm losing my thought here.
Well, I would say just the initial things that you just mentioned,
Okay.
Right on target. I mean, and again, this is not anything I've read, but it is so resonant with my feelings about it that I just continue to assert that the New Age brings with it collaboration through internal reaching, not through group gatherings, so to speak.
Yes. And I remember my point. I guess what I'm saying is that when you speak, that there's several things going on. There's the masculine mental thoughts of what precisely you're saying, but there's also the feeling and the emotions that are carried on words,
Yes.
like hello, or hello.
Right.
I mean, in no cases is the meaning the same. So in that case, the feminine portion, or the feminine energy that's carried on words in our speaking, is stronger. And I would say that your feelings, your intent, all of that, it's carried on words, whether we like it or not. One of the things I learned from teaching violin is that students can only focus on learning one little aspect of the violin at a time. And while they're learning one aspect of the violin, let's say paying attention to their bowing, they're not paying attention to playing in tune. It's only one thing at a time. And I've noted that their mistakes are all similar. So that as the brain, just like on a computer screen, you have one screen up at a time. As the brain focuses on one thing, everything else goes subconscious, but it still goes on. They still use their fingers. And rather than play in tune, they average them. They're always equidistant, and it doesn't fit on our scale. Sounds terrible, Dad. But they average them, and they have all these different processes that go below their subconscious mind. And I believe that we have feelings running all day long because we have vibrations. We have a drummer, our heartbeat. We have little neurons and signals. These are all frequencies in our body. They're going on all the time. And there's always an octave of those that are in feelings. So we may be thinking that we're studying, while deep down we're also experiencing feelings. It's just not like the computer screen that we have up now. So we're this very complex frequency matrix and matrix beings, and that we express on all levels. And, one of the things about music is that you can go right into the feeling level. Another thing about music, and I could talk forever on this, is that I'm going to backtrack. I did a research project with Yamaha on the effects of music on the aging process. And I played for a group of elderly people who were in their little wheelchairs and walkers while they were waiting for lunch. No, they weren't coming to hear me play. They were waiting for lunch.
Right.
But since they were in their walkers, they couldn't get away. And they had nothing to do. No, so nobody's calling them. Trust me. They never talked to one another, and they never talked to me. And in fact, one time, one guy fell over. I thought he was dead. Nobody even looked. It's like everybody's frozen.
Wow.
And I go in and play this very beautiful violin music. It's whiny, piney, sad stuff. And I believed that in 6 months they talked to me, and in 9 months they were talking to each other. I believed that by simply feeling sorry for themselves, or feeling lonely, or feeling hurt, that they were able to release some of this emotional baggage that they haven't let go, and they were able to gain more of a normal lifestyle. And they did it through music, because rather than thinking, I'm so mad at Frank, how could he have done this? You don't go there. You just feel alone, or you feel hurt, or whatever, or you feel angry, which you can portray in music. And so we had this feeling bath on a regular basis. And we were able to bypass the left brain that has judgments and has grudges and doesn't want to forget or forgive. But we were able to do all those beautiful processes through music. And we were able to go right into the divine feminine, if you will, right into the emotional powerhouse of a person, and do tremendous healing with music.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so glad you brought up the part about emotion. And this is also an area, when you talk about emotion and the subconscious and the ego, that I've heard Michael Tsarian speak about, and I just love developing this point from different perspectives, because as you know, the emotions are really being, suppressed by the culture and the society, and that particular trapping of the divine feminine is one of the main areas where growth can occur. And I find that particularly interesting in context with this discussion, because music is one of the most powerful tools for affecting the emotions. So that, instead of having this sense of hopelessness, oh, the New World Order is doing this, and the Illuminati is doing that, oh, and HARP is bombarding us with that, and they're doing chemtrails, and they're doing this, and they're doing... How about sitting down and listening to a nice Bach concerto instead?
Sounds good to me.
It's very interesting. A few years ago, I discovered a piece of music by a Native American artist, and I don't want to mispronounce his name. I believe his name was Carlos Nikos. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but it's a whole CD of very simple progressions of flute music. Not, no harmonies, no octaves. The only thing, actually, there were, he had echoes, and I forget what the music term that would correlate to echoes. What would that be?
A harmonic?
Yeah, harmonics. So he didn't have harmonies in that you had multiple instruments or multiple notes, but he would play a few notes and then you would hear the harmonics echo. And what I discovered was that the sound of that flute music was almost physical. You could feel that music cutting through negative energy in the atmosphere, and it was so astounding and so pronounced that I thought, well, maybe this has something to do with my clear sentience, in a sense, but no one's going to believe me. So what I started doing was, when someone was feeling depressed, I'd send this music, and I'd say, listen to this, and they'd report to me and say, oh, this is amazing. I'd like to remind everyone that we're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. I'm Keith David Henry. We're on the Community Listening Network, www.clnradio.com. And we're speaking with Jill Mattson. You absolutely have to pick up her book, and you must pick up some of her music, or I will come to your house personally and start singing, and you don't want that. So, Jill, why don't you tell us, we have maybe 30, 40 seconds left. Tell us about your websites and your music.
www.jillswingsoflight.com has healing music that I've had incredible compliments, like one lady said that she had a near-death experience, and this was the closest that she had ever heard to the music she heard while she had left her body.
Wow.
So I have just beautiful music and sound healing books, and also www.jillshealingmusic.com has free MP3s and a complimentary sound healing newsletter that I hope you find stimulating.
Thank you once again for joining us, Jill. This is the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on clnradio.com. We will see you next week.